Good morning. Nice to have you back with us today, and welcome to our second focus session of the day from the studio in Vienna. My name is Borut Eržen. I am head of Border Management and Security Program at ICMPD. Today I will be talking about border management in times of external shocks with Mr. Marko Gašperlin and Mr. Patrik Engström. Let me introduce our speakers first. Mr. Patrik Engström is the head of the National Border Policing Section of the Swedish Police Authority. He has served as a number of posts, from uniformed police to crime intelligence and investigations, as well as expert in the various governmental panels. Prior to his current post, Mr. Engström served as International Law Enforcement Advisor to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, known as UNODC, in the Southern Africa, leading the UN work on border management and general law enforcement evaluation and capacity building in 13 countries. Between 2006 and 2010, Patrik worked as a specialist intelligence officer on facilitated illegal immigration at Europol. In addition, he serves as the Swedish member of the Management Board of the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, Frontex. Our second speaker and guest is Marko Gašperlin. Marko is the Assistant Director at the Ministry of Interior at the Uniformed Police Directorate in Slovenia. In addition to his duties in management of strategic and operational police tasks, including border police, at the national level, Marko is responsible for a number of other tasks related to the coordination of Slovenia's position in the field of border management to be presented in the EU Council bodies, guides and controls of Slovenia participation in the activities of the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, coordination of EU Home Affairs funds and the implementation of various EU projects, including several twinning projects, just to name a few. At the same time, Marko is a Slovenian member of the Frontex Management Board and since 2016 also its chairman. Let me start with our topic of today, and I think that we all agree that the Schengen is one of the most visible results of the European integration and has led to the creation of several measures to standardize border controls across the area. But within the last 5 years, Europe has experienced two major external shocks: the 2015 and 16 migratory crisis and the 2020 COVID-19 outbreak. These have illustrated the limitations of Schengen integrated setup, with member states walking back the harmonized approach to border management. While some of observers may say this is the beginning of end of Schengen, we will try through this session to explore how an integrated border management as known in the European Union, and with this approach, how can we help solve problems of the current and future challenges. We will also try to examine various tools and reflect on how well prepared is the European Union for the future shocks. So my first question goes to Patrik. Good morning. Actually, what happened? Schengen standards at the external borders are supposed to be harmonized. What explains the variety of responses and why a harmonized approach was absent to some extent?
First of all, thank you very much for having me on this panel. I think this is a great initiative, and that's a very, very good question. I think the main reason why the reactions varied so much between different member states is that the reason for reintroducing border controls and the reason for changing the ways of external border management was due to the pandemic. And the response to the pandemic is primarily a health response. And as you know, health and public health is, although mentioned, prevention or health measures are mentioned in the Schengen border context, in the Schengen border regulations, the actual measures to prevent the spread of a pandemic are within the member states' remit, not within the Schengen remit. So what you have is the application of the Schengen border regulation, the codex, while at the same time applying various national measures to prevent the spread of the pandemic. And in the interaction or the conflict between the Schengen Border Code and the national measures to prevent the spread of the pandemic, you get a disjointed effort.
Okay, thank you, Patrik. Regarding the harmonization process, the external borders, just a brief answer. Are we still far away to have a full-fledged harmonization?
I think that we are, actually, but I'm not sure it's because of the pandemic. I think it is because since the start of the Schengen project, the Schengen area and the world at large has changed. The threats are different now. And I think that what is perhaps a greater challenge to the idea of Schengen is not the pandemic. It is the way that terrorism and serious and organized crime has adapted to the idea of Schengen. And instead of seeing the external control of the border as an obstacle, it sees the openness of the Schengen area as an opportunity. So I think that it is not the pandemic that is the greatest challenge to harmonization. I think it is the change in other threats that is the greatest challenge to harmonization.
Thank you. Let's stay a bit still with the COVID-19 pandemic, which affected not only border management, but the whole world. Marko, we note now that the whole world is struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the EU is no exception to that. In your opinion, what is the impact of a pandemic as such on the harmonization process? We heard from Patrik that it's not only COVID-19, but how COVID-19 itself affected. And the second question to you is also, can health measures really be the sole responsibility of the member states?
Okay, thank you first of all for the opportunity to be with you today. So let me answer on your question with describing what happened in our part of Europe in this spring because of this pandemic situation. Several member states introduced, including Slovenia, introduced very strict measures at the borders. And what caused serious problems. Suddenly we had hundreds and hundreds of lorries at the borders. People were not anymore able to come back from, for example, from Spain, Italy to Romania to Western Balkan countries and so on. Actually, and there was, to be honest, no proper European response. And in such situation, on Slovenian initiative, regular weekly meetings of the chief of police were organized. And the main topic of these meetings was how to organize the convoys, the transit people, how to help people to come back from I don't know, from one EU countries to another countries because of the restriction. It wasn't possible simply to travel. And this, including EU citizens, despite the all rights of free movements and so on. So I would say, yes, we don't have a robust system. I think the main reason Patrik already explained, and it will be more than needed to develop a more robust system, which will be able also to, let's say, to function properly in such extraordinary situation like this pandemic situation was and is.
Thank you, Marko. Let's stay a bit also with you. The shared responsibility is one of the topics that are quite frequently discussed at the EU level. With the implementation of European Border and Coast Guard Regulations 2.0, including EU standing corps that are supposed to be operational by January 2021, the shared responsibility between the EU and the member states for external border control should actually came to life. How far we are from this goal?
Yes, with the EBCG 2.0 regulation, we have quite clear goal to, let's say, to establish standing corps within Frontex as a part of the EU integrated border management. We are working hard, I have to say. I think agency and all other entities related to the agency and also the member states. However, I think we have some problems caused by not only by this pandemic situation, implementation of the precondition or creation of the precondition that this standing corps will be operational by January next year are slightly delayed. Starting with the preparation in the agency, also in the management board. Some delays are also in recruitment, in training of so-called category 1 of the staff. This staff is future permanent staff of the agency working in the field at the external borders. Just one one issue, for example, the training, one of the training academies in Poland during the training has to be closed because of the pandemics or of the infected people in the course. So, and additional issue or challenge is also multi-financial framework. Since because of the, let's say, changes of the priorities in the EU, I would dare to say, and more financial needed for the consequences of this pandemic crisis. Also, not all foreseen financial sources foreseen for the implementation of this new regulation will be available for the agency. So we have to, in the future, to also somehow to prioritize. However, I think we are in the progress, but it will be not operational 100% as planned by January next year. And also, I'm sure also there will be some restrictions, some problems also on the side of the member states if we are talking about the so-called absorption capacity.
Okay, Marko, thank you very much for this. It was quite explanatory. Apparently, not only other challenges, but also COVID-19 is affecting preparations of the EU member states and the agency on how to establish this specifically shared responsibility component. Patrik, EU is developing or implementing various policies and systems on the security of the external borders and within the Union. All these systems and policies are very much interdependent. For example, Frontex with standing corps, pact on migration and asylum, interoperability and new functionalities in the border checks like exit entry system, ETIAS, etc. In the current situation, in your opinion, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this concept and policies?
Well, I think the advantages obviously are that a number of these systems, and particularly the interoperability between the systems, will make external border management a lot more efficient. It will align member states more. It will bring the idea of a common external border and an equal level of border management and quality of border management closer to a goal. So I think a lot of that, those are definitely advantages. At the same time, these are political processes. The Migration and Asylum Pact is in its early stages, and depending on the outcome of the negotiations and the outcome of the final pact and the final regulations, additional changes may need to be made to other forms of regulation, such as the fairly recent regulation for the European Border and Coast Guard Agency. But this is natural in a political process. Step by step, you change laws, meaning that you will need to change other laws, meaning that you will need to constantly develop new systems. So a disadvantage, perhaps, is the fact that such a large chunk of legislation, such as the Asylum and Migration Pact, will require a lot of negotiation, and when it comes to an end, when it is finally passed, will require additional legislative efforts. Another obvious disadvantage is that the current situation with the pandemic impacts negatively on the implementation of a lot of the system development. Minor things such as being unable to travel for meetings, such as having difficulties in procurement, in transportation, may impact negatively and delay implementation of necessary systems. Those are aspects of the pandemic that may impact the development of interoperable systems for quite a long time to come.
Okay, thank you, Patrik. Since it's a very complex question, Marko, maybe I would be very interesting also to hear your views on all these interdependent concepts and systems within EU and the external borders. What are your views, or from Slovenian perspective?
We are, I think, speaking about the integrated border management. I think it's quite known term, and it describes very well the system which should be implemented at external borders, but not only at external borders, but also at the internal borders and in inland. And if this integrated border system, management border system, has several components, and the system is functioning only if all the components are properly in place. And in the past, we saw, just to remind us, on the crisis, migration crisis 2015, only with the border checks, border controls at the external border, it wasn't possible to do nothing, since there was not proper support for the, let's say, in the terms of asylum policy. There was no proper support in the return issues. There was not proper support in the IT, let's say, proper IT support and in handling this mass migration flows and so on. I would say that if we will not in the future develop more harmonized all the components of integrated border management, we will face always the same problems, and we will discuss always the same problems.
Thank you. Question to both of you, actually. In the light of the recent events in Europe, terroristic attack in Nice and recently in Vienna, there are certain concerns among EU member states, but also among public, to somehow to reform the Schengen. But this probably would be a step backward from the main idea behind the free movement in the region. The question is, are the measures taken at the EU external borders combined with the compensatory measures within the European Union, at least with some member states, effective and efficient enough to sustain potential current and new challenges and threats, and to ensure safe, secure and free movement within the European Union?
Can I start with?
Yes, please, Marko, go ahead. Yeah.
I already mentioned that I would say that reform of Schengen is not necessarily a bad prognosis. It's the question, what do we think, what do we understand of this reform of Schengen? But you pointed rightly, yes, we have two basics of proper functioning of Schengen. One is control at the external borders, but I will repeat again, only control with other systems cannot be enough. And here I have in mind the asylum system, migration, return issues, and also. And some hope this new migration pact proposed by asylum migration pact proposed by Commission gives some hope that we are moving in the right direction. On another important, let's say, element of the Schengen free movement are also so-called compensatory measure. That is police work at the external border when there is no more border controls or systematic border checks. And we know that some member states are using, let's say, instead of I would dare to say, instead of developed properly a system of these compensatory measures, they are using possibility to reintroduction of the border checks at internal border practically since without any break since 2015. What is without any doubt not any more, let's say, legal situation. Commission attempt, previous Commission attempt to let's say, with the amendment of the Schengen border code, let's say, to improve this situation possibility, but without success. So, but with better, I think, with some implementation of migration asylum pact, supporting to the external border control at external borders, with the implementation of EBCG points 2 on one side, and on another side, I would, with the proper development of the standard for police measure, compensatory measures at the inland, at the internal borders and inland, I think this could be a right reform with the promise that we will really reform Schengen in the right direction to develop it as a robust system who will also be able to, let's say, to react and to survive also in such critical situations like migration crisis 2015 was, and this year, this pandemic challenges.
Thank you. Patrik, what are your views on this?
I think it's a really important and very interesting question, and I'd actually like to get back to your initial comment on this situation being the beginning of the end of Schengen. First of all, I would also like to say that I very much agree with much of what Marko said, that a reform of Schengen is not necessarily a bad thing. And that I do not think that this is the end of the beginning of the end of Schengen. The Schengen Agreement and the idea of free movement is a fundamental pillar, not only for the Schengen area, but for the EU. However, the idea of Schengen and the introduction of the Schengen regulation was in a different time. And as times change and as circumstances change and as the world changes, the Schengen will need to reform. And as Marko said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It is inevitable. What we need to do is, rather than reforming and changing Schengen reactively, I think it is important to try to anticipate the development of the world, of the threats, and of the challenges, and create a Schengen regulation and a Schengen system that is much nimbler and much faster to respond to changing threats. I also agree that the use of the reintroduction of border controls is a last measure. But as long as the Schengen itself isn't responsive enough, and as long as the regulation and the system isn't responsive enough to quick changes in threats, those last resorts may become inevitable for member states to prevent threats towards not only the member states itself, but the Schengen area. So change of Schengen is inevitable, but it's not a bad thing. it's a good thing.
Glad to hear that. Before we conclude the session, I have a question that maybe leads us a bit into the future, and it is related to European Pact on Migration and Asylum. Within the pact, there is a stipulation about the screening function of border police. To a certain extent, screening is already in place. But how you see the implementation of the screening function based on the European Pact on Migration and Asylum in the future? How this will be possible to implement?
Okay, yeah, this is one of the questions now when we are discussing member states discussing the proposal of the Migration Asylum Pact. And I think it is also one of the main novelties which can guarantee the success, since the aim of this screening is simply, as I like in the hospital triage, let's say, to see who is really in the need of protection, and then to enable proper access to asylum procedure, to identify the pure economic migrants, and then to return them immediately back to the or readmit or return back without, let's say, unjustified burden the asylum system of the member states altogether. But it will be hard to implement, I'm sure, since the deadlines for this screening procedures, everything are very tight, very short. But I think the only way, this will be the only way that we will be able to let's say, to proper manage migration flows at the external borders. Some basic concepts were already in the Frontex regulation with this migration management teams. But unfortunately, with some exemptions in South Italy, this concept wasn't implemented properly. It was more idea, not so defined. But this assessment now is very much, will be very much defined in the proper regulations. And I hope that we will come to a, let's say, to agreement that this system will be applicable, functional tool, and will be basic tool for the management of the migration at the external borders in the future.
Thank you very much. Just to end, people are asking me quite often when I'm traveling whether in the future, because of COVID-19, metal detector gates will be replaced with the sanitary gates. It sounds like a joke, but in some countries this is already introduced. How do you see the reality of having sanitary gates at the borders?
If I may start,
please, Patrik.
I think there is very scant scientific evidence for the efficiency of sanitary gates. They are perhaps primarily a way to educate or to make travelers aware of various sanitary requirements. They are a possibility to interact with travelers and ensure that they understand the idea of fighting pandemics and preventing the spread of disease. What I think is going to be perhaps of greater importance is using systems that we already have in order to identify travelers that may come from risk areas. We can use, technically can use passenger name records, the PNR directive, as well as API data to identify travelers that come from areas or regions where you have diseases. Current regulation does not allow it, but it may be a way to, at a very early stage, even before people arrive in Europe, identify risk travelers that may be required to undergo examinations. But I am sure that we are in the future, whether it's sanitary gates or the extended use of PNR and API data or any other measures, I am sure that we will see a more common approach to also preventing and combating the spread of disease and pandemics on the external borders.
Thank you very much. Very nice answer. We are now running out of time. A big thank you to both our speakers for being here with us today and provide us with the views on the current and the future border management in the European Union. The next focus session is on labor mobility initiatives, and it will be streamed here in 30 minutes. We hope to see you again shortly. Thank you.